afternoon, I think it is, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to one of our lunchtime series to hear Doris de Pont, a New Zealand fashion designer extraordinaire. You will, of course, those of you who are coming to the show on Friday and Saturday, will see an Anzac collection, which has been a happy coincidence because, of course, it's Anzac weekend. Doris, in fashion circles, is held in very high repute. In fact, she was made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit in January 2013. She's also a foundation trustee of the New Zealand Fashion Museum and is the curator of 6 fashion exhibitions. She's extremely knowledgeable, she's very artistic, and she's going to tell us today whether we are similar to our Aussie cousins and present company Australians accepted. Perhaps we like to think we're a bit different, but Doris is going to examine that and explore that. She's happy to, some of us will be interactive, she's very happy to talk to you or with you about her life experience and her knowledge of fashion. So welcome, Doris de Pont.
Thanks, Susie, and thank you all very much for coming out in your lunchtime. I think I haven't got my microphone on. I think I haven't. Sorry, I'll turn my microphone on. Is that better? I don't have to shout. You still can't hear at the back? I need to get the technicians onto that. Can you? Yep.
I might just turn this on as well.
All right. Technology, it's great, isn't it? Is it working? Yep, cool, fantastic. I'll just have to speak up then, clearly. So, indeed, with Fashion ID shows in 2015 taking place at Anzac Weekend, and with the World War I commemorations in full swing on both sides of the Tasman, it's very timely for us to think about our shared identity, our Australian-New Zealand shared identity. We've got lots of common experiences, shared regional geography, shared history. In the 19th century, it was proposed that New Zealand become the eighth state of the Australian Federation, and it's an idea that sort of rears its head from time to time. I think with consternation on both sides of the Tasman. We have shared cultural origins, and there are significant ties between us. We trade freely with Australia, and we travel freely between the two countries. Yet, we don't really see ourselves as similar. In fact, we more commonly frame ourselves as opposites and as rivals, not just on the sports fields. So because this is Dunedin Fashion Week, and we recognise that fashion is an important way that we give expression to our identity as individuals and as a society, we're going to use the lens of fashion to look at ourselves, New Zealanders and Australians. The runway show, Together Alone, which some of you will see on Friday and others on Saturday, is a reprise of an exhibition that was held at the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne in 2009. And it brought together 4 New Zealand designers, myself, World, Nomdi, Zambezi, and 4 Australian designers, Akira, Material Byproduct, Romance Was Born, and Tony Matajewski. In 2015, we're going to revisit that exhibition, and we're happy to report that all of the designers that showed then are still working as designers, except myself. And Tony Matajewski didn't want to participate in this again, so we're very lucky to be able to replace him representing Australian fashion, the new generation of Australian fashion, a new label called Maison Bris Vegas. And Maison Bris Vegas is the label of Carla Benotti and Carla Van Lan. Carla Van Lan was Carla Berg's, who was the inaugural winner of the Emerging Designers here in Dunedin in 2005. So it's really great to have her back again and showing what she's doing now. So I'm really excited about that. So by bringing together the works of these designers, here at this presentation and on the runway this weekend, we're creating an opportunity for you, the audience, to experience fashion from both sides of the ditch and to decide for yourselves if there is a distinct New Zealand identity or a distinct Australian identity, or perhaps there's an Australasian identity. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm going to begin by introducing myself and my background and my special interest in identity as it's expressed through fashion. Together I'd like us then to think about some of the stereotypes, some of the expectations that we have of New Zealand and of Australian fashion. How do we see ourselves? I'm hoping there's some Australians here too. Are there some of the emerging designers here? Good, great, yep, good, fantastic. You'll be able to defend yourself. You are outnumbered though. And then we can look at each of the 8 designers who were part of the show and who are going to be part of the runway show, and see whether the stereotypes that we have, whether they actually fit, whether these designers fit that mould. And then the last thing I'd like to do is then, with all of us then, to go back to that list of stereotypes and see if we can evaluate and draw any conclusions about the existence of a unique New Zealand or Australian identity as we express it through our fashion. So the first slide I'm going to show you, if I get this right. Yes. So that's me, age 4, on the left with the pigtails and the blonde hair, and the little polo jumper and woolen skirt. And you can see that we don't really, that's this one here on the right in the matching, or not matching skirt, but the little polo jumper and skirt is my sister. And you can see that we don't really look like the other kids on White Swan Road in Mount Roskill in Auckland. And that's because I am the daughter of Dutch immigrants who came to New Zealand in the 1950s. And my mother's family came from a family of tailors in Tilburg in Holland, and my father came from a family of shoemakers in Tilburg in Holland. And when we came to New Zealand, we used to, at Christmas and other times of the year, get food parcels from Holland with speculaas and hagelslag and drop. And we used to also get parcels with clothes. So our clothes weren't English in origin, but were Dutch in origin. So when I was this age, I can't remember that I was particularly perturbed about not looking like the other kids in the neighbourhood. But I do remember very clearly at about the age of 10 or so, when I used to go to school and wore a uniform, but even couldn't get that uniformness in my uniform, and was sort of pointed out and ridiculed by children from my own school and from other schools. I can remember very, very clearly at one point thinking that if I couldn't join them, then I was going to beat them and make a virtue of looking different from the others. And to that end, I learnt to sew and learnt to make my own clothes so that I would be capable of defining my own identity and not having it read or designed by anyone else. So I made clothes for myself, but I didn't envisage at all that I would be able to make a living making clothes in the 1970s. So I went and trained to be a teacher and went and did my OE, and my OE of course was not to Britain but to the Netherlands. And while I was there, I was often approached actually by people about my clothing and invited to make one just the same for them. And that really was the beginning of my sort of foray into a commercial production, a commercial fashion career. So when I came back to New Zealand in the 1980s, 1984, it was indeed feasible to make clothing here, and I planned to do that and had some conversations with people who were in the industry in New Zealand. And they told me that the biggest difficulty in New Zealand was getting original fabrics. And I don't know if some people here will remember, but for a very long time, right from 1938 right through until 1988 really, all imports to New Zealand were restricted, and you could only import with a license. And so the importers of fabrics had licenses, and so the fabric that you could get here was restricted, not by fashion people or by your imagination, but by the people who held licenses. And so what would happen is that they would bring in a fabric, and that would be all that was available. And you might purchase it, but somebody from an equivalent of a Glassons or Farmers or something might buy that same fabric. So you there was no differentiation of value in the fabric, and so you could indeed be caught out with a sort of a handmade designed garment that was made out of the same fabric that was available at Farmers. So I made a decision straight away to try and solve that by creating my own fabrics through all sorts of different techniques. And so I was really pleased, I must say, yesterday to see the emerging designers, to see so many people again resorting to making taking that first step, making their own textiles to make their garments out of. So I used upholstery fabrics, and I used swimwear fabrics, and I did applique, and I got people to screen print for me and to paint my fabrics for me. And if that thing works, which it doesn't look like it's going to, does it? On the far left is a garment made in 1986 or so, I think, by the shoulder pads and the tulle. And that's a screen printed fabric, and it's printed by a textile designer called Adrian Foote. Adrian Foote I later went into business with and had a label called DNA. The garment in the centre there is a 1990s menswear winner of the Benson & Hedges Menswear Award. And it's based on the Hondenwasser flag, so the Hondenwasser flag for New Zealand. I don't know if you know it, with the koru and the green of the New Zealand bush. So it was made in linens, and the trench coat has the koru cut into the lapel. And this one here on your right is from a collection called Let's Gather Here, which celebrates really my heritage and my tailoring background, but also the new migration into New Zealand, particularly into Auckland with Pacific Islanders, Chinese, Indian, so that wonderful rich cultural mix that we have in New Zealand these days, that's really enriching our language and our perspective, I think. Whoops, then it did work. I stopped my label in 2008 and went to university and did an honours degree in museum studies. And the outcome of that was the establishment of the New Zealand Fashion Museum. I hope you've all been, have you all been to the Fashion Museum? Good. I'm sure you have. You can when you get home anyhow. It's an online museum. And it's an online museum dedicated to fashion in New Zealand. And alongside the online collection, the collecting of objects and images and stories of fashion, we do storytelling in exhibitions. One of them was here 2 years ago, because last year was Tony Carlson's here at the Art Gallery. The year before was an exhibition called Home Sewn, which was one of the exhibitions curated by the New Zealand Fashion Museum. The exhibition that's represented here on the left is an exhibition that we did in 2011, which was tracking the unique relationship that exists between the colour black and our New Zealandness, our New Zealand identity. If we can identify a New Zealand identity in black, the question was whether there was also a distinctive regional identity. And so earlier this year, we had an exhibition in Auckland called A Darker Eden. It was curated by the Otago Polytechnic here and brought to Auckland. And we explored really whether you can actually locate identity in a location, whether where something comes from leaves traces, leaves markers in a garment, whether they're caused by the climate, history, cultural and social values of a particular place. So this is really my area of interest, is how identity is manifest in what we wear. So I said earlier that we'll look at some of the stereotypes, some of the expectations that we have, or how we see ourselves and how Australians see themselves and how we see Australians, perhaps, hopefully, how they see us. That would be really nice to hear. In the late 90s, Australia set up a fashion week, an international fashion week, and invited people from all over the world, the media from all over the world, to come and have a look. And in 1998, they invited the New Zealanders to be part of that, so that it became more an Australasian fashion week. And the media came from far and wide. And Marcus von Uckermann, who was at that time the fashion director for Vogue in Paris, came to Fashion Week, and he wrote and noted a remarkable difference between New Zealand and Australia. He observed that New Zealanders have a darker outlook. They're less showy-offy, more intellectual. Not surprisingly, in New Zealand, his observations quickly became the New Zealand fashion media's most quoted quote. And New Zealand fashion began to describe itself in those terms as dark, edgy, intellectual, i.e. conceptual designers. Lisa Armstrong in 2004, Lisa Armstrong was fashion critic with the London Times. She proposed that the New Zealanders deliberately were attempting to differentiate themselves from Sydney Fashion Week, which New Zealand sees as a sort of Sodom and Gomorrah flesh pot of sin, showiness and sequins. And she described it in European terms, sweepingly concluding that Sydney is Milan and Auckland is Antwerp. So we have these sort of ideas about what New Zealand and Australian fashion is about circulating in the fashion media, and certainly the New Zealanders adopting those monikers for themselves. So I'm going to ask, I've got a couple of fantastic student assistants helping me. I'm going to ask them to bring out the whiteboard and put it in front of here so we can light it. Do you want to just bring it across in front of the screen so it's lit? Great. Fantastic. Now, who's New Zealand and who's Australia? New Zealand and Australia. What colour's your pen from New Zealand?
Black.
What colour's your pen from Australia? Thank you. So perhaps we can start with the black, and we'll start with those monikers that we so love to use for ourselves, which is dark, edgy and intellectual, please, in black. Can we start some Australian terms? Anyone got? Bronzed? Bright? Thank you. Gauche. Whoa. Brash, thank you. Casual. Confident, fantastic. Can you write a little bit bigger so people can you read from where you're sitting, more or less? Yep, great. Yours is beautiful, thank you. Body conscious.
It's a pretty good description of that. I'd definitely say bright, confident, casual. Definitely, and right over here, there's a lot of black, like right past the shops, there's a lot of black.
We've got black, haven't we? No, we'll just put the black with the New Zealanders, please.
I don't know about intellectual, but
You haven't tried to understand us yet.
Can I just make a point? Because you're saying with Australian, you're talking about
I'm not talking about Sydney. What about Melbourne? Yeah. Good. Think about Melbourne.
None of these words just Melbourne fashion, I think you could say, is more on the lines of what is under New Zealand.
Different climate as well.
Very different regional fashion cities.
A very different regional. Okay, good. So that's a really interesting thing to look at. And when I go through the designers, all the 8 designers that are in the exhibition, I will let you know which region they're from, and that might help you understand or see their garments. You might see that you're not actually right.
But I tend to, I mean, I've spent time in both cities and spent time in both fashion cities. So
Yeah.
I can kind of comment on what I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's right. I mean, these are stereotypes, so they're the sort of the typical things. They're not necessarily very nuanced. Yeah. So, unique. Thank you. Any other sort of whereabouts in New Zealand? Okay, ethnic. Dark. We haven't got dark yet. We'll just push this back a little bit, actually, too. Yep, cool. So we get the light so you can write more words, girls. Yeah. Layers. Oh, cool. Yep.
For New Zealand to romantic.
For?
Romantic,
New Zealand. Okay. Good.
Would New Zealand be trend setting?
Would New Zealand be trend setting? Well, you'd have to ask the Australians, but let's put it there. No, look, we're just we're open for this. Is
For Australia, it's confidence, and for New Zealand, it's a lack of confidence.
oh, okay, lack of confidence going. Oh, just right up the side here. Come on here.
Wow, that's great. Yes, we're in church.
Okay, cool.
We're dark, we're black.
Yep.
And it's somebody else that's told us that.
Yep. Well, one of the ones that I'd like to add to the Australian list, because I heard it many, many times yesterday from the young designers, was playful. And I did think that, and whimsical. So there's a real humour, I think.
Actually, it's very interesting, like with the concepts or visuals we associate with the two countries. If you look at the most important movie makers, for example, for New Zealand, I would immediately think Jane Campion, and for Australia, Baz Luhrmann, which are very different aesthetics and concepts and visuals, and I think they speak a lot about their personality.
Well, shall we put those two names with that? So Baz Luhrmann with the Australians and Jane Campion here with the New Zealanders. Baz, B-A-Z. L-U, can you spell it for me? L-U-H, Luhrmann, isn't it? L-U-H. Jane Campion with a C. Luhrmann, yeah. Ah, yeah. All right. All right, okay. Cool.
It's always climatic, warm climate and cold climate.
Okay.
Australia has colourful birds,
Yep.
whereas we have very...
Yep. Yes, our birds even dress in drab colours as compared to the Australians. Cool. Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you. Yep. Let's move the board across, and we'll go and look at the 8 designers that we're going to show on the runway, and we'll see if they fit the bill, if they fit our thoughts. So I thought that we might fail in this exercise and that I'd have to do my own list. I'm going to flick very quickly through the list that I made. There you are. So I'll just introduce the designers. Some of them you've met already, myself. So this is just a very quick little review of my garments. The garment on the left there is the one that was in the exhibit, is one of the garments that was in the exhibition in Melbourne. And as you can see, my clothing's quite colourful. And also an aspect that you can see in my clothing, I think that's very strong, is that the tailoring background, which I told you about my heritage, and creation of separates, so that there's room for the wearer to be active in how they put their outfit together, and a real interest in surface embellishment and print that has its origins in New Zealand cultural and art practice. So the one on the left is based on some work by Richard Killeen, very well-known New Zealand artist, and the one on the right here is based on a piece of work by Paul Hartigan, also a New Zealand artist. And for those with good eyesight, you'll see that it's actually made out of tui wattle tops turned into polka dots. The Dunedinites will know who this is that we're looking at. This is Nomdi. Nomdi is, I'm from Auckland, sorry, I was going to tell you where everyone's from, so I'm from Auckland. Margie is Dunedin born, bred and ever true, and she grew up actually in a home that was filled with the trappings of an accomplished dressmaker. Her mother, who was an immigrant from Greece, was a very competent dressmaker. And so all the things that you could possibly need to make clothing were available in the house, including fantastic fabrics. Margie, in her practice, firmly locates herself in Dunedin, and she puts a huge emphasis on the value of being from Dunedin, of place. So she says of herself, she says, "There's no other city in New Zealand." I'm making a noise, isn't it? Is it horrible? I'll try not to move. There's no other city. That's It's coming from one of the microphones. I don't have a handheld. There's no other city in New Zealand that can boast the history of Dunedin, its importance in early New Zealand, and its underground feel. It's very free of pressures and influences that can often prove to be very superficial in other cities in New Zealand. I don't think she was trying to win friends and influence people. The label's design identity revolves around the ingenious reworking of traditional, tailored, and vintage references, combined with primarily a dark palette, a layered and deconstructed street-inspired aesthetic. In the 1980s, Margie went with her sister Liz of Zambezi to Japan in search of original fabrics, and that had a huge impact on the design for both of them. The contemporary Japanese aesthetic in the mid 1980s was very much that of the Miyake and Yohji Yamamoto, etc. And so the qualities of the Japanese design found a place in their design practice. The qualities of layering, the acceptance and valuing actually of imperfection and unfinished, and garments that enfold the body rather than encase the body. So those aspects became a very strong element in Margie's fashion practice. Nomdi is very firmly positioned in New Zealand fashion and international fashion, actually, as a fashion outsider. And it's a sense of noir in creatively and humorously playing out her identity. How you wear the garments is not prescribed by her. The garments should be are free to be worn in the way that you want to wear them. You can mix them up and layer them and bring in pieces, old pieces and new pieces. And as you can see, Margie too has a sense of playfulness and a good sense of humour in that jacket on the right. The next label that was in the Fashion Week the fashion exhibition in Melbourne is World. Many people will know World. They bring to life the humorous and irreverent vision that's at the heart of their label. World challenges the status quo, and its collection titles exemplify this attitude. Their collections are called things like "I don't like sport, but I can high jump." There is no depression in New Zealand. And my favourite, of course, is housework makes you ugly. In the World Design Room, paper, artificial turf, tarpa cloth and other non-conventional materials are reimagined and reworked into their garments and into contemporary fashion. They consistently flout existing expectations of what is acceptable in New Zealand fashion, whether it's the use of intense and often clashing colour combinations or eccentric fabrics such as plastic tablecloth or kitsch brushed cotton wall hangings. World says of itself, as designers, our raison d'etre is to act as conceptual leaders, constantly striving to give form to new approaches to fashion and to fulfil an educative role, reflecting that the mainstay of any creative industry are ideas and experimentation. Rather, they enjoy and celebrate the panoply of possibilities fashion has to offer designers who are prepared to buck the trend and to go it alone in pursuit of their unique way of seeing. So they're one out of the box, I would say, and have many of those characteristics that we just identified really as Australian. Our fourth New Zealand label is Zambezi. Zambezi is headed by Liz Finley, and Liz was born in Greece, came to New Zealand as a young woman and grew up here in Dunedin, and then moved in as a young adult, moved to Auckland, where she now lives and works. She's the older sister of Margie from Nomdi, so she has that same shared background of a mother who was a skilled and practicing dressmaker with a ready supply of fabric, and that has led for Liz very much to a lifelong love of beautiful fabrics and a respect for the skill and craft of making. As I said earlier, with Margie, the pair of them travelled to Japan, and as a result, that Japanese perspective is evident in Liz's design practice as well, adding asymmetry, deconstruction, and black to her design practice. She felt that using black allowed the fabric and the texture and the cut and the drape of a garment to be paramount. And that's become the foundation of the label as it's evolved over the last 35 years. She's been working now for 35 years as a fashion designer. Past collections and past garments are often revisited and reinterpreted, consolidating the Zambezi design vocabulary and invoking a strong sense of history and of memory. A deliberate disregard for pursuing the newest trends means that pieces from different collections can be seamlessly integrated into new configurations and allow the wearer opportunities for personal expression. And we have in the lineup of garments that are there at the front is a Zambezi garment from probably about 10 years ago, the outfit from Zambezi. Good, so that's the four New Zealanders. Let's look at the four Australians. This is the first Australian for consideration, who's not an Australian at all by birth. He's Akira, born in Japan in '64 and came to Sydney in '86, where he came to study at the Sydney Institute of Technology. So Akira draws very heavily on traditional Japanese design and techniques, including shibori, origami, embroidery, printing and hand painting. He privileges fabric over construction and references in his work the kimono, which is a simple garment with huge variety thanks to the application of materials and embellishment. He's used vintage fabrics and he's also created some very highly personal fabrics, so both in woven textures and in embellishment, so painted and printed fabrics. This image on the far left is a garment that was in the exhibition, is in the collection of the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, and you can see the bead encrusting on the neck piece, but on the front are chrysanthemums, so a very traditional Japanese motif. The one in the centre indeed has embellishment on the surface, but what you can see underneath those sheer layers, so subdued, is this print that you can see here on the right being painted onto the wall. It's a garment that was in the exhibition Future Beauty, which has just been on in Brisbane, of fashion from Japan, and included Akira's work in it. And that motif from underneath was painted on a great big huge wall mural. So he creates garments that are romantic, feminine, which again, like the Japanese, the Japanese aesthetic that we just talked about, garments that enfold rather than encase the body, so they're very soft, always referring back to the kimono, but reinterpreting the kimono according to the influences of his now home, Sydney, the relaxed Australian attitudes and the environment where he lives. He says of himself, "If you cannot wear it, then I'm defeating the purpose, and that's a mistake. This is the trick, to find balance between what is wearable and what is art. This is what I aim for." Material byproduct, the label established in 2004 by Susan DeMasi and Chantal MacDonald, now just headed by Susan DeMasi. As the name suggests, is this awful for you? Yeah. Shall I take my necklace off and put it on my, excuse me, is that here? Okay, on, okay, yep, cool.
Have you turned that one off?
I'll turn that one off.
Yeah, that one off. Okay, and then don't turn that on just yet, I need to adjust the volume.
Good. I got the walking microphone so that I didn't have to stand still, but I'm turned out that I am standing still, so we can probably work with that one. You will? Now, how's that? Better?
And I'll turn the volume up.
Cool, okay. That's a bit scary too. Good. So, material byproduct. As the name suggests, concepts of making and sustainability provide the intellectual rationale for this Melbourne-based fashion practice. The work of material byproduct, the work of material byproduct scrutinises the process of making through the development of systems that streamline the production and also minimise the resulting byproduct of material waste endemic to the fashion industry. All of the piece of fabric that Susan chooses to make a garment from is used in that garment, so it's either sort of folded back or worked into the garment in some other way. Central to the label, the House of Material Byproduct, are enactments. That's how Susan presents her range. They're performance experiences that present seasonal collections within private spaces, art galleries, museums, and institutions around the world. Enactments engage a select and highly curated group of guests to participate in a ritual routine of dressing and undressing that draws upon choreography, film, and the spoken word to deliver an immersive sensorial experience. So on the right here you can see an enactment of one of Susan's collections where you can see what she talks about in her garment design is about being in the garment, so the movement and the experience of wearing the garment is all important to her. So she's incredibly conceptual in her making. The garments need to be flexible and be worn in different ways. and they can often be remodelled and without adding or subtracting. So their longevity, they have longevity, built-in longevity. So it's a sustainable practice that's presented in an artistic way. She says of herself, the garments are more than clothes. They are compositions in space. For the wearer, the experience of being immersed in the clothes is more important than the experience of being admired in them. So her clothes, indeed, there's a garment of hers hanging up in that little lineup of garments. It's come to us from Ing in Christchurch, who is the stockist of her label. And she sent those pieces through from the newest collection. You're very welcome to come and have a look later on and just have a look at how seamlessly they are produced. The next Australian label, does anyone know this? The Australians will know this, but what are the others? Do you know it? Romance Was Born? Yeah. Romance Was Born is a Sydney-based label. Oh, sorry, I should have said Susan Damasio is a Melbourne-based label. Romance Was Born is a Sydney-based label from Anna Plunkett and Luke Sales. Quirky, idiosyncratic, colourful, complex, frequently spectacular, kitsch, crafty, fun. Collections and fun collections are often the hallmark of the Romance Was Born label. But they have a real, they've got their heads screwed on as well, and their garments have a real resonance with a much wider public. And they sell actually right throughout the world, so in London, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Tokyo, and in Australia they're actually stocked by David Jones. So despite the eccentric looking collection you can see here, they're actually very commercially savvy as well. They collaborate with Australian artists to bring about their whimsical vision of life, with prints that form the basis of each collection. They take inspiration from artists, often working with them collaboratively to create a unique language for each season. They're firmly rooted in Australian artistic and creative practice. And this collection that you can see here on the runway is a collection called Bush Magic, which was is the summer collection. And it's based on the children's books, The Gumnut Babies by May Gibbs, and they were books that came out early in the 20th century, so it was 1920 or so. These books were written for Australian children, and you can, I don't know if you can see the detail, but in the garment there on the right, which is one of the garments that will be on the runway, you can see the little illustrations from the book that have made the textile for this collection. And you can see that these showpieces here on the right, which are incredibly elaborate and spectacular and dramatic pieces for the runway, also have very wearable interpretations that can just hang on a rack in a shop. So they say of themselves, because a lot of our work is handmade and one-off, it's perfect for the stage. And that is kind of how we see the pieces as well. They're for performing in. They're a bit of a platform. They also say, they echo the world mantra, more is more. And our new addition to the Australian and New Zealand lineup is this label here, which is Maison Bris Vegas. It's a label from Carla Benotti and Carla Van Lun. As I said, Carla Van Lun was the winner of the Emerging Designers in 2005. They are based in Brisbane, and Carla actually has Dutch heritage too. So when she won the Emerging Designers Award here, she got a good prize, I think, and went to Europe with that money, and she travelled to Europe on her European passport. And then went and worked in Paris for some time, which is where the this label was kicked off. So the label Bris Vegas, she said Bris Vegas is a subtropical New World suburbia with limited sartorial culture. Maison was meant as an irreverent reference to the idea of French tradition and luxury. So again, that playfulness and that irreverence, so the double Carlas, so we've got double Dorises here, as you will know, for a fashion week. I can't think that it's ever happened to me before in my life that I've been anywhere with somebody else called Doris. So anyhow, this label is run by two Carlas, so the double Carlas say that they love exploring Australian style and lifestyle and trashiness, with a particular focus on Queensland. They like the casual culture, the warm weather, and the irreverence towards everything seems to influence their work. They situate their work in the context of conceptual and experimental fashion design, practice, and presentation, so intellectual. Through thoughtful recycling of rubbish materials and traditional craft practices such as patchwork and embroidery, hand block printing, they seek to address the issue of clothing waste and the excess of modern consumer culture. The modern consumer culture, which seems to value only newness and devalues design, materials, resources, quality, time taken to make clothes, and the people who make them. And that's, I think, particularly relevant at the moment. I don't know if you've all seen the Robbie Burns with the cloak made out of. And tomorrow is indeed the day that you need to wear your garments inside out to show your labels. At the very least, tomorrow morning when you get dressed, have a look at your label and see where it's made and see if you should be wearing it, if you can support the making of it. Anyhow, it's a very strong issue for the East School, very strong issue for me too, of course. Trashtopia, which is this collection that the garments that we've got here. There's one on the end there, and they will be on the runway. Trashtopia links the golden era of American style, manufacturing and consumerism with today's climate and resource crisis. The prints draw inspiration from vintage holiday and beach style, particularly the mid-20th century Californian style, an iconic era that certainly influenced Queensland and especially the Gold Coast. The prints depict a dystopia, a summer holiday on an overheated planet where the world's oceans are polluted with enormous amounts of plastic that's killing the marine and bird life. So they're very intellectual and very politically active. And it's one of the words that actually didn't really come up in our discussions, was it? The sort of politics of clothing making. But it's clearly a strong issue in young practitioners. So let's go back to our stereotypes. When we go back to those, we also need to be mindful that what we're looking at here with these 8 designers is not mass market. These are all designers that are independent, conceptual, and avant-garde. They've developed their own aesthetic and they resist fashion trends, really. And in doing so, in having that personal voice, that independent voice, they've actually found resonance, found an audience in the rest of the world. So they're all of the designers you've seen have had success selling internationally. Good. Let's have a look if we can get these designers to fit some of our labels. Shall we get the whiteboard out again? Please. Sorry, I'll move that screen through, thanks. Sorry, there should be a blank screen in there. There it is. All right, so how do we feel about these things now? Let's have a look. So intellectual, for example. I mean, for me, it's very clear looking at all these designers that that's a term that we can apply to both sides of the Tasman. It's very thoughtful, conscious design that's happening. Somebody said earlier about the black, the darkness, that's got perhaps more to do with climate than with history. I think that was reasonably evident in what we saw, didn't we? That the further north you get, the more colour you see, the warmer it gets. So any other aspects of that that people would like to give some feedback on their stereotypes? Do we think that they fit, or are there some that we think could fit? I mean, I'm really interested to see if there are. Yep.
I was quite interested in the whole idea of playfulness, because I don't think that we're terribly at ease with playfulness in New Zealand.
Thank you.
And whereas in Australia, from the evidence in front of us, there's a little more ease.
Yes, they're more self-deprecating, aren't they? I do agree with you.
Well, I don't know that it's self-deprecating as such, but simply accepting the idea that playfulness is okay. Whereas we don't do that in New Zealand.
Yes.
I think there's a component also in Australia of sense of humour.
Yes.
And maybe not taking themselves too seriously, and maybe the playfulness comes also from there.
Yeah. Yes, I agree, because I think even labels in New Zealand like World, who aspire to that playfulness or to having a bit of fun in colour and in their fashion, they do it with earnest intent rather than from a simple joy and pleasure in just having fun.
I was thinking of the Australians as a sort of a dry sarcasm, dry, relaxed sarcasm.
Right.
Seems to be their personality. Clever.
Yeah, so a dry, sarcastic humour.
Yeah.
Yes, from Australia, yeah. Are there other terms in there that you think might apply, as we've seen? Yes. Right. Yep. Yeah. So recognition of diverse ethnicities and place. Heritage in people's design. That's common, you think, to both, isn't it? Yeah.
Could we talk about the tall poppy syndrome?
Go on. You talk about the tall poppy syndrome.
No, here in New Zealand.
Yes.
If all else fails, we're black.
Ah. Good. Okay. All right. So did you hear that? She says that the default position of black in New Zealand is perhaps a response to our culture of the tall poppy syndrome. So you don't really want to stand out and be noticed. So the default option is black. Is that? Yeah. That's. Yep.
Actually, that's really prevalent in Australia as well. There's a really big history of that affecting different artists and different designers, and I think. I mean, it's interesting because you've got 4 designers from each country, but if you consider the other designers that are doing a lot in fashion weeks at the moment, or maybe have been doing but now have disappeared, there's a lot of dynamics happening in Australian fashion at the moment.
It's a
lot of dynamic changes happening in
Right.
Australian fashion at the moment that I don't think necessarily come out from just these 4 designers.
Thank you. I think that's yeah.
I actually got to see the Curator show last week of his new collection, which was actually presented as part of his 20-year anniversary, where he mostly showed old pieces of work, because and half of the floor was empty. So that was kind of interesting to be in that context in the current fashion week and to see it here represented in such a way.
In such a way, yeah. Yes.
Without being a critic, I'm surprised there's no sort of ethnic, like Aboriginal side of the Australian.
Yes, there may well be. I must say I'm not terribly informed. Perhaps do you see Aboriginal representation in Australian fashion?
There was a new initiative by, it was held in association with Fashion Week last year, but not this year, for Indigenous Fashion Week. But after a year, it doesn't exist anymore. But it was the first initiative of its kind.
Yeah. Yeah, we do in New Zealand in Fashion Week have an Indigenous section, so a support network and young designers in that category. It's a platform for them.
That's one huge difference, I think, between New Zealand fashion and Australian fashion, because historically we haven't had that support in our culture, or that recognition in our culture. And it seems to me, after having come to New Zealand only a couple of times, that the support that you have for your Indigenous community is a lot more prevalent.
Good. Thank you all very much. I've just got a few sort of concluding remarks. That's really great. I mean, it's lovely that this is it's an open question. In looking for common threads, there seem to be none that are exclusively localised either in New Zealand or in Australia. But I think there are a few that are common to both places that I've seen. One is the desire for designers to give expression to their own personal vision while leaving room for an active wearer to personalise clothes. And I think that's a common thread in all of the designers that we've seen. They're not prescriptive. It's not a look. It's an open offering from the designers. Another is the emphasis on practicality. All of the designers that are here talk about being able to wear the garments, so having the garments wearable. And that wearability means that garments have got a sort of certain casualness in them, a lack of formality really. And Claire Renaud in the Black Book wrote about the casualness in fashion, and she called it a culture of ease. And I think that culture of ease pervades both New Zealand and Australian fashion, that lack of formality, that idea that you should be comfortable in your clothing, not trust into it. The other thing that I just noticed in this, that all of these designers and in the emerging group that I saw yesterday have a clear view of themselves, of who they are, of their heritage, of their location, and of their aspirations. And they all give expression to that identity, their identity through fashion. And in a crowded world, which is the fashion world of today, that's what you need. You need an authentic voice if you want to be heard, if you want to be seen, and if you want to be bought. Thank you.
Thank you to Doris. It was fascinating with the two Carlas. As I said earlier in the week, we've clearly planned two Dorises. It's extremely well planned by the committee. The Carlas, she was actually wasn't she, Margo, our first winner. And we all could tell she was distinctly from Brisbane. And I remember it was the first emerging designer in a competition in the Octagon in a marquee. It was drizzling with rain outside, and she had short shorts, one of her models, and she ran down the catwalk with a parachute behind her. It was completely different to anything we'd seen, so it's fantastic to see her continuing on, and she was the very first winner, or they were, of our emerging designer competition. So Doris, it's great to have you here, and thank you. I'm sure we're going to see a lovely collection tomorrow night and Saturday night, and a fascinating comparison of Australia and New Zealand. Could you thank Doris once again? Doris is very happy if those of you who can stay, if you want to look at the garments and talk to her. She's very approachable. Thank you.